You're being jerked around like a puppet on strings. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and your day is ruined. A coworker makes a comment, and you're angry for hours. Your partner says something thoughtless, and you shut down for days. A plan falls through, and you spiral into frustration. You think you're responding to life, but you're not. You're reacting. And there's a massive difference between the two. A reaction is automatic. It's your nervous system hijacking your behavior before your conscious mind has a chance to choose. It's you being controlled by external circumstances and internal impulses that you didn't even know were running the show. Every time you react, you're handing control of your emotional state to whoever or whatever triggered you. You're making yourself a victim of circumstances that you have no power over. But here's what most people never realize. Between what happens to you and how you respond to it, there's a space, a gap, and in that gap lives all your power. That's where choice exists. That's where you can decide whether to be controlled by what happens or to consciously choose your response. That's where you stop being a puppet and start being the person holding the strings. Right now, that gap in your life is so small it might as well not exist. Something happens and you react instantly. No pause, no consideration, no choice. Just an automatic response pattern that's been running since childhood. And those patterns are destroying your relationships, sabotaging your career, and keeping you stuck in cycles of stress and regret that you can't seem to break. The most powerful people you know are not the ones who never face difficulty. They're the ones who have control over their reactions. They experience the same triggers, the same frustrations, the same disappointments as everyone else. But they don't react. They respond. They've widened that gap between stimulus and response. They develop the ability to pause, consider, and choose their actions based on their values instead of their impulses. This is not about suppressing your emotions or becoming some stoic robot who never feels anything. This is about developing the self-mastery to feel everything without being controlled by anything, to experience anger without acting out of anger, to feel fear without being paralyzed by it, to notice frustration without letting it dictate your behavior. This is about reclaiming control of your life from the automatic reaction patterns that have been running it by default. I'm going to show you exactly how your reactions are controlling you right now. I'm going to show you why you keep reacting the same way to the same situations and expecting different results. And I'm going to give you the precise framework for widening that gap between stimulus and response, so you can start choosing your actions instead of being controlled by your impulses. But first, you need to see how much of your life is being run on autopilot. And that sight is going to be uncomfortable. Are you ready to stop being controlled? Are you ready to understand that most of your suffering comes not from what happens to you, but from how automatically you react to it? Then let's expose the puppet strings. Let's widen the gap. Let's turn you from someone who reacts to life into someone who responds to it with intention, power, and control. Chapter 1. You're reacting to interpretations, not reality. You think you're reacting to what actually happens, but you're not. You're reacting to your interpretation of what happens. And that interpretation is being filtered through years of conditioning, past experiences, limiting beliefs, and unconscious assumptions that you're not even aware of. Two people can experience the exact same event and have completely different reactions. Not because the event is different, but because their interpretations are different. Someone doesn't text you back. One interpretation. They're busy and will respond when they can. Another interpretation. They don't care about me and I'm not a priority. Same external event. Completely different emotional reactions. The person who interprets it the first way feels neutral or patient. The person who interprets it the second way feels hurt and rejected. Neither person is reacting to the objective reality of a delayed text message. They're reacting to the story they told themselves about what that delay means. This happens in every area of your life. Your boss gives you feedback. You could interpret it as they're invested in my growth and want me to succeed, or they think I'm incompetent and are disappointed in me. Your partner wants space. You could interpret it as they need time to recharge so they can be present with me, or they're pulling away and the relationship is ending. A project takes longer than expected. You could interpret it as I'm learning what's actually required and getting better, or I'm failing and should give up. The interpretation you default to determines your emotional reaction, and that emotional reaction determines your behavior, and your behavior determines your results. So if you want different results in your life, you don't start by trying to control external circumstances. You start by controlling your interpretations, because that's where your reactions are actually being generated. Most people never examine their interpretations. They just accept them as truth. Someone cuts them off in traffic, and they immediately interpret it as disrespect. That person is an inconsiderate jerk who doesn't value my time. This interpretation generates anger, and the anger generates aggressive driving or road rage or a ruined mood for the next hour. But what if you interpreted it differently? That person might be rushing to an emergency, or they made a mistake like I've made before, or simply that's something that happened. Same event, different interpretation, different emotion, different behavior, different outcome. You can't control whether people cut you off in traffic, but you have complete control over how you interpret it. And that interpretation is what actually controls your reaction. The problem is your default interpretations are usually negative. Your brain has a negativity bias. It's wired to interpret ambiguous situations as threats because that kept your ancestors alive. Better to assume the rustling in the bushes is a predator and be wrong than to assume it's nothing and be eaten. This bias made sense in a world of constant physical danger. But in the modern world, it just makes you interpret neutral or ambiguous events as personal attacks, rejections, or failures. Someone is quiet in a meeting, and you interpret it as disapproval of your idea. Someone doesn't smile at you, and you interpret it as dislike. Someone suggests a different approach, and you interpret it as criticism. Your brain is automatically generating negative interpretations of ambiguous data, and you're reacting to those interpretations as if they're facts. But they're not facts. They're just the stories you're telling yourself. You need to start catching these interpretations before they generate reactions. The next time you feel a strong emotional reaction to something, pause and ask yourself, what interpretation am I making about this situation? What story am I telling myself about what this means? Usually, you'll discover you're making the worst possible interpretation without even realizing you had other options. Then ask, what else could this mean? What are other possible interpretations that are equally valid? Don't just look for positive interpretations. Look for neutral ones. Look for interpretations that don't make you the victim or the center of the story. Maybe this has nothing to do with me is often the most accurate interpretation, but the one your ego resists most. When you identify multiple possible interpretations, you break the automatic reaction pattern. You create space between the event and your emotional response. You recognize that you're choosing an interpretation, and if you're choosing, you can choose differently. You can select an interpretation that serves you instead of accepting the one your brain generated automatically. This doesn't mean you ignore red flags or convince yourself everything is fine when it's not. This means you distinguish between what actually happened, objective facts, and what you're telling yourself it means, subjective interpretation. A delayed text is a fact. They don't care about me is an interpretation. A critical email is a fact. They hate me and my work is an interpretation. Someone leaving the company is a fact. It's because I'm a bad manager is an interpretation. Start separating facts from interpretations in real time. When something happens and you feel reaction building, identify the objective facts first. What actually happened that I can verify? Then identify your interpretation. What story am I telling myself about what happened? This separation alone will give you back enormous control over your reactions. You're not reacting to life. You're reacting to your interpretation of life. And interpretations are optional. They're chosen, even if that choice is happening unconsciously. Make the choice conscious. Examine your interpretations. Question your default stories. Choose interpretations that empower you instead of victimize you. This is the first step in controlling your reactions instead of letting them control you. Chapter 2. Your triggers are revealing your wounds. The things that trigger you most intensely are not random. They're not just bad luck or unfortunate circumstances. They're pointers to unhealed wounds, unmet needs, and unresolved patterns from your past. Every disproportionate reaction you have is your psyche showing you where you still have work to do. And until you do that work, you'll keep getting triggered by the same types of situations over and over again. If someone not texting you back sends you into a spiral of anxiety and self-doubt, that's not really about the text. That's about a deeper wound around abandonment or worthiness. If criticism from others makes you defensive and angry, that's not really about the criticism. That's about a deeper wound around shame or inadequacy. If plans changing makes you disproportionately upset, that's not really about the plans. That's about a deeper need for control or predictability that's not being met. Your reactions are always bigger than the situation warrants when they're touching an old wound. That's your signal. When your emotional response to something seems out of proportion to what actually happened, you've found a wound, and that wound is going to keep generating the same reaction until you heal it. Most people spend their entire lives blaming external circumstances for their reactions. She made me angry. He hurt my feelings. This situation is so frustrating. But no one can make you feel anything. What they can do is trigger an emotional pattern that already exists inside you. The anger was already there. The hurt was already there. The frustration was already there. The external event just activated it. This is actually good news. It means you don't need the world to change for you to stop having these reactions. You need to heal the wounds that are creating them. You need to understand why certain situations trigger you so intensely. And you need to do the internal work to resolve those old patterns so they stop running your present life. Start by identifying your top triggers. What types of situations consistently generate strong emotional reactions in you? Be specific. Not when people are mean to me, but when someone questions my competence, or when someone seems to be excluding me, or when someone doesn't follow through on what they said they do. These specific triggers are clues to your specific wounds. Then ask yourself, when was the first time I remember feeling this way? What did this situation remind me of? Often, your current trigger is activating a pattern that formed in childhood or adolescence. If you react intensely when someone questions your competence, maybe you had a parent who constantly criticized you, and you internalize a belief that you're not good enough. If you react intensely to feeling excluded, maybe you experience significant rejection in your formative years, and you're still trying to avoid that pain. The wound doesn't justify the reaction. Understanding where your trigger comes from doesn't mean you get to keep reacting poorly, but it does help you recognize that you're not actually reacting to the present situation. You're reacting to a past situation that this one resembles. And once you see that, you can start to separate the two. You can learn to say to yourself, I'm feeling triggered right now. This feeling is familiar. It's connected to my past pattern around wound. But this present situation is different from that past situation. I'm safe. I'm capable. I can respond differently than I did back then. This acknowledgement interrupts the automatic reaction and creates space for a chosen response. Healing these wounds often requires deliberate work. Therapy can be helpful. Journaling about your patterns can reveal connections you hadn't seen. Meditation can help you observe your reactions without being consumed by them. The key is recognizing that these wounds exist and that they're driving your reactions until you address them. You also need to practice self-compassion around your triggers. You're not broken or damaged because you have wounds. You're human. Everyone has them. The difference between people who control their reactions and people who don't is not that the first group has no wounds. It's that they've done the work to heal them or at least to recognize them. So they're not running on autopilot. When you get triggered, instead of immediately reacting or beating yourself up, get curious. Interesting. I'm having a really strong reaction to this. What wound is this touching? What's this telling me about where I still need to heal? This curiosity creates distance from the reaction. You're observing it instead of being consumed by it. And in that observation, you have choice. Your triggers are not your enemy. They're your teacher. They're showing you exactly where you need to grow. Every situation that makes you lose control is an opportunity to gain more control by understanding and healing the pattern underneath it. Stop blaming the situations for triggering you. Start thanking them for showing you where your work lies. The goal is not to never be triggered. The goal is to recognize when you're triggered quickly enough that you can choose your response instead of defaulting to the automatic reaction. to notice, oh, this is touching my abandonment wound, and then consciously decide how to respond instead of spiraling into the familiar pattern of anxiety and neediness. You will have triggers for the rest of your life, but as you heal your wounds, their intensity decreases. What used to send you into a rage might just register as mild irritation. What used to devastate you might just feel disappointing. And that reduction in intensity gives you more room to choose your response, more control over your reactions, more power over your emotional state. Stop giving your power to your triggers. Start using your triggers to find your power. Identify them, understand them, heal them. This is how you stop being controlled by your past and start responding to your present with the wisdom and choice you're capable of. Chapter 3. The pause that changes everything. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies your power to choose. And in that choice lies your freedom and your growth. This is not just a nice philosophical idea. This is a practical mechanism through which you reclaim control over your reactions. The pause is everything. And right now, you're not using it. When something happens that typically makes you react, your current pattern is event immediate reaction. There's no gap, no pause, no consideration. You feel anger and you lash out. You feel hurt and you withdraw. You feel anxious and you try control. The reaction is so fast that it seems like one continuous motion. The trigger and the response are fused together, but they're not actually fused. There are split seconds between the trigger and the response. Neural signals traveling from your amygdala to your prefrontal cortex. Chemical changes in your body. Thoughts forming in your mind. These happen fast, but they're not instantaneous. And in that tiny gap, you have the ability to intervene, to pause, to create space where choice can exist. The pause is a deliberate interruption of your automatic reaction pattern. It's you noticing that you've been triggered and consciously choosing not to react immediately. It's creating a buffer between what you feel and what you do about what you feel. This buffer is where self-control lies. This buffer is where wisdom acts instead of impulse. Most people resist the pause because it feels uncomfortable. When you're triggered, your body is flooded with stress hormones. Your nervous system is activated. Everything in you is screaming to do something right now to make this feeling stop. Lashing out would make it stop. Withdrawing would make it stop. Getting drunk would make it stop. Any action feels better than sitting in the discomfort of the activation without reacting. But that discomfort is temporary. If you can sit with it for even 60 seconds without acting on it, you'll notice it starts to shift. The intensity peaks and then begins to subside. Your rational brain comes back online. You remember your values. You consider consequences. And from that clearer state, you can choose a response that serves you instead of a reaction that serves your immediate comfort. The pause is a skill that must be practiced. You don't just decide to pause once when you're highly activated and expect it to work. You practice pausing in low-stakes situations until it becomes automatic in high-stakes situations. You practice pausing when you're mildly annoyed until you can pause when you're enraged. You build the muscle of deliberate delay between feeling and action. Start with a simple physical pause. When you notice you're triggered, take 3 deep breaths before you do or say anything. Not shallow breaths. Full, deliberate breaths into your belly. This does 2 things. First, it forces a delay. You can't breathe deeply and react simultaneously. Second, deep breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which calms your stress response. It literally brings you out of fight or flight and back into a state where thinking is possible. You can also use a physical pause technique. When triggered, count to 10 on your fingers. Touch each finger to your thumb as you count. This gives your hand something to do other than gesture aggressively or type an angry text. It occupies your motor system with a neutral action while your emotional system calms down. It sounds simple, but it works. Another powerful pause technique is environmental. When you're triggered, physically remove yourself from the situation if possible. Go to another room. Step outside. Take a walk around the block. This literal distance creates psychological distance. It breaks the immediate connection between the trigger and your reaction. It gives you space to think instead of just feel. During the pause, You can use specific questions to engage your rational brain. What am I actually feeling right now? What need is not being met? How do I want to feel about my response to this tomorrow? What would my best self do in this situation? What response aligns with my values? These questions shift you from reactive mode to reflective mode. They turn you from someone having an emotional experience into someone observing and evaluating an emotional experience. The pause is not about suppressing your emotions. You're not trying to not feel angry or hurt or anxious. You're feeling it fully. You're just not acting on it immediately. You're creating space to feel the emotion without being controlled by it, to experience the activation without letting it dictate your behavior. This is crucial to understand. The pause doesn't make the feeling go away. It just prevents the feeling from automatically generating your behavior. You can be extremely angry and choose not to yell. You can be deeply hurt and choose not to withdraw. You can be very anxious and choose not to try to control everything. The feeling and the behavior are separate. The pause is what keeps them separate. As you practice the pause, you'll notice your ability to tolerate emotional activation increases. What used to feel unbearable becomes manageable. What used to seem like it required immediate action reveals itself as just a temporary feeling that will pass on its own. This tolerance is freedom. This is what it means to not be controlled by your reactions. You'll also notice that when you pause and then respond intentionally, you almost never regret your response. But when you react immediately without pausing, you frequently regret it. Every text you wish you hadn't sent. Every word you wish you could take back. Every action you wish you could undo. These all came from not pausing. From letting the reaction run automatically without inserting your conscious choice. Start practicing the pause today. Pick one recurring trigger and commit to pausing before you react to it. Just 3 deep breaths. Just 10 seconds. Just a brief walk to another room. This tiny interruption is the difference between being controlled by your reactions and controlling them, between being a puppet and being the one holding the strings. The pause is not weakness. It's not avoidance. It's not suppression. It's power. It's you taking back control from your automatic patterns. It's you creating the space where choice exists. Master the pause and you master yourself. Chapter 4. Choose your response based on values, not feelings. You've been taught to follow your feelings, to be authentic, to honor what you feel in the moment. And this advice has made you a slave to your emotional state. Because feelings change constantly based on factors you can't control. Your blood sugar, your sleep, your stress levels, random triggers from your past. If you base your behavior on your feelings, your behavior will be as inconsistent and unpredictable as your feelings. And inconsistent behavior produces inconsistent results. Highly effective people don't respond based on how they feel. They respond based on what they value. They've defined who they want to be and how they want to show up in the world. And they let those values guide their responses regardless of what they're feeling in the moment. They might feel angry, but if they value composure, they respond calmly. They might feel afraid, but if they value courage, they respond boldly. They might feel hurt, but if they value communication, they respond honestly. This is not about ignoring your feelings. Your feelings are important data about what matters to you and where your needs aren't being met. But they're not good instructions for behavior. Feelings tell you something is happening internally. Values tell you how to respond externally. Feelings are the weather. Values are the compass. You acknowledge the weather without letting it determine your direction. Right now, your responses are being determined by whatever emotion is strongest in the moment. Someone criticizes you and you feel defensive, so you defend yourself aggressively. Someone disappoints you and you feel hurt, so you withdraw or retaliate. You feel stressed and you reach for comfort food or alcohol or distraction. Your behavior is a direct reflection of your emotional state, which means your emotional state is controlling your life. But you don't want your life to be controlled by your emotions. You want your life to be guided by your values. You want to be the kind of person who stays calm under pressure, even when you feel stressed, who communicates clearly during conflict, even when you feel angry, who shows up consistently for important commitments, even when you feel unmotivated. This alignment between values and behavior is what creates integrity. And integrity is what creates respect, both from others and from yourself. To do this, you need to define your values explicitly, not vague concepts like be good, but specific principles like, I value honesty in my relationships even when it's uncomfortable, or I value discipline in my health habits even when I don't feel motivated, or I value calm communication even when I feel angry. These specific values become your guide when emotions are trying to drive your behavior in a different direction. When you're triggered and you've paused, this is where values come in. In that pause, you ask, what do I value in this type of situation? How would the version of me who embodies that value respond? This shifts you from what do I feel like doing to what's the right thing to do based on who I want to be? Someone insults you and you feel the urge to insult them back. Pause. Ask, what do I value here? Maybe you value taking the high road. Maybe you value not engaging with negativity. Maybe you value setting boundaries calmly. Whatever your value is, let that guide your response instead of your anger. The anger is valid, but it's not in charge if your values are. Your partner does something frustrating, and you feel like shutting down and giving them the silent treatment. Pause. Ask, what do I value here? Maybe you value open communication. Maybe you value working through conflict together. Maybe you value being the person who doesn't punish others with withdrawal. Let that value guide your response. You can feel frustrated and still choose to communicate instead of withdraw. This requires that you've actually defined your values in advance. You can't access them in the moment if you haven't identified them ahead of time. So right now, before you're triggered, take time to write down your values. What kind of person do you want to be? How do you want to show up in relationships, at work, under stress, during conflict, when you're disappointed, when you're afraid? Get specific. For each major area of your life, define at least one or two core values. In relationships, I value honesty and kindness. At work, I value excellence and collaboration. Under stress, I value staying calm and thinking clearly. During conflict, I value listening before defending. These become your defaults. These are what you reach for when your emotions are trying to make you react. You'll notice that values-based responses often require short-term discomfort for long-term benefit. It's uncomfortable to stay calm when you're angry. It's uncomfortable to communicate when you want to withdraw. It's uncomfortable to show up when you don't feel motivated. Your emotions are optimizing for immediate comfort. Your values are optimizing for the person you want to become. This is where discipline intersects with emotional control. Discipline is choosing your values over your feelings consistently enough that it becomes your character. Every time you respond based on values instead of feelings, you're reinforcing the neural pathways of self-control. You're training your brain that feelings don't dictate behavior, that you're capable of feeling one thing and choosing another. You'll also find that when you respond based on values, you feel better afterward, even if the response was harder in the moment, because you're proud of how you showed up. You're aligned with who you want to be. That alignment creates a sense of integrity and self-respect that no emotionally driven reaction ever produces. You might feel good for a moment when you lash out at someone who hurt you, but later you feel ashamed. When you respond calmly instead, it's harder in the moment, but better for your long-term relationship with yourself. The people in your life will also notice a shift. When you stop being controlled by your emotions and start being guided by your values, you become more predictable in a good way. People know what to expect from you. They know that even if you're upset, you will communicate about it rather than lashing out or withdrawing. This predictability builds trust. It builds respect. It makes you someone people want to be around. Start practicing this today. Before you go into a situation where you know you might be triggered, remind yourself of your values. I value staying calm during this difficult conversation. I value listening to understand, not just to respond. I value not taking things personally. Set the intention to let those values guide you regardless of what you feel. Then, when you're triggered and you've paused, consciously access your values. I'm feeling angry right now, but I value composure and clear communication. So I'm going to take a few more breaths, gather my thoughts, and respond in a way that reflects those values. This conscious choosing is what transforms you from reactive to intentional. Stop letting your feelings run your life. Start letting your values guide it. Feel everything. Let your values determine what you do about what you feel. This is how you maintain control over your reactions. This is how you become someone who isn't tossed around by emotional weather, but stays on course toward who you want to become. Chapter 5. Reframe the situation before you react. The meaning you assign to events is what generates your emotional reaction, not the events themselves. And meaning is not fixed. It's chosen. Most of the time unconsciously, but it's still chosen, which means you can deliberately change the meaning you're assigning, and thereby change your emotional reaction. This is called reframing, and it's one of the most powerful tools for controlling your reactions. A reframe is looking at the same situation from a different perspective that changes its emotional impact. You're not denying reality or engaging in toxic positivity. You're recognizing that reality can be interpreted in multiple ways, and some interpretations serve you better than others. The facts stay the same. The frame around those facts changes, and that change in frame changes everything else. Let's say you get rejected for a job you wanted. One frame: I'm not good enough and I'll never succeed. This frame generates shame, hopelessness, and inaction. Another frame: this role wasn't the right fit and something better is coming. This frame generates disappointment, but also continued motivation. Same event, different frame. Completely different emotional reaction and behavioral outcome. Or someone gives you critical feedback. One frame: they're attacking me and think I'm incompetent. This frame generates defensiveness and anger. Another frame: they see potential in me and want to help me improve. This frame generates openness and curiosity. Same feedback, different frame, different reaction, different result. The frame you default to is usually the one that was modeled for you growing up or the one that your anxiety creates to keep you safe. If you grew up with critical parents, you might default to framing feedback as attack. If you grew up with unreliable relationships, you might default to framing any distance as abandonment. These default frames are running automatically, and they're generating automatic reactions that don't serve you. You need to become aware of your default frames. When something happens and you have a strong reaction, ask yourself, how am I framing this? What meaning am I assigning to this event? Once you can name your frame, you have the power to question it. Is this the only way to see the situation? What are other possible frames? The goal is not to find the most positive frame. The goal is to find a frame that's both accurate and useful. Sometimes the most useful frame is a neutral one. Not this setback is actually a blessing, but simply this setback is information about what needs to change. Not this person is trying to hurt me, but simply this person is acting from their own pain and limitations. One powerful reframe is from personal to impersonal. When something doesn't go your way, your default frame might be, this is happening to me because I'm not good enough. But you could reframe to, this is happening as part of a process that includes both successes and setbacks for everyone. You're removing yourself from the center of the story. It's not personal. It's just what happens. Another powerful reframe is from permanent to temporary. Your default frame might be, this situation is never going to change. But you could reframe to, this situation is difficult right now and will evolve as I take action. You're recognizing that current circumstances are not forever circumstances. This reduces a sense of helplessness that generates despair. You can also reframe from threat to challenge. Your default frame might be, this problem is going to overwhelm me. But you could reframe to, this problem is going to require me to grow, which is exactly what I need. You're not minimizing the difficulty. You're changing its meaning from something that victimizes you to something that develops you. Practice reframing in real time. When you notice a strong negative reaction, pause and identify your frame. Then deliberately generate at least 2 alternative frames. You don't have to believe them immediately. Just practice seeing the situation from different angles. This practice builds your cognitive flexibility. It teaches your brain that the first frame it generates is not the only frame available. The most effective reframes are the ones that shift you from victim to agent, from this is being done to me to I have choices about how to respond to this, from I'm trapped to I'm learning, from this is unfair to this is life and I can handle it. These reframes don't make the situation easier, but they change your relationship to it from powerless to powerful. You can also use questions as reframes. Instead of framing a setback as, "Why is this happening to me?" reframe to, "What is this teaching me?" Instead of, "Why can't I catch a break?" reframe to, "How can I use this experience to become stronger?" The question shifts your focus from blame to growth. Some situations are genuinely difficult and can't be positive framed without lying to yourself. Job loss is hard. Illness is hard. Relationship endings are hard. The reframe here is not, "This is actually good." The reframe is, "This is hard, and I am capable of handling hard things." You're acknowledging reality while also acknowledging your capability. Write down your most common triggering situations and your default frames for each. Then write alternative frames. Keep this list accessible so you can reference it when you're triggered. Having pre-made reframes available means you don't have to generate them the moment when your emotional brain is activated. The reframe must happen before or during the pause, before you react. If you pause when triggered and immediately access a more useful frame, your emotional reaction shifts. The anger lessens. The anxiety calms. The hurt becomes manageable. And from that shifted emotional state, you can choose a response that serves you instead of reacting from the initial frame that victimized you. This is not about gaslighting yourself or pretending everything is fine. This is about recognizing that you're already framing everything that happens. The question is whether you're doing it consciously or unconsciously, whether you're choosing frames that empower you or accepting frames that victimize you. Take control of your frames, and you take control of your reactions. Chapter 6. Build emotional tolerance through exposure. You're avoiding the situations that trigger you, and that avoidance is making you weaker. Every time you encounter something that generates a strong emotional reaction, and you remove yourself from it or numb yourself to it, you're teaching your nervous system that this trigger is dangerous and must be avoided. You're reinforcing the very pattern you want to break. You're ensuring that next time, your reaction will be just as strong or stronger. The only way to gain control over your reactions is to build tolerance through repeated exposure, to deliberately put yourself in situations that trigger you, stay in them without reacting, and train your nervous system that the feeling is not an emergency. This is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. The discomfort is a signal that adaptation is happening, that you're expanding your capacity to handle difficult emotions without being controlled by them. Think about physical tolerance. If you're not used to cold water, jumping into a cold shower is shocking and intolerable. But if you do it every day for a month, your body adapts. The water is still cold, but your tolerance increases. The shock lessens. Eventually, you can stay in cold water without it overwhelming you. Your nervous system has learned that cold water is not a threat that requires an emergency response. Emotional tolerance works the same way. If you're triggered by criticism, avoiding criticism keeps your tolerance low. But if you deliberately seek out situations where you'll receive feedback, stay in them without getting defensive, and process the discomfort, your tolerance increases. Criticism still might sting, but it no longer overwhelms you. Your nervous system has learned that criticism is not a threat that requires an emergency defense response. The key is gradual exposure. You don't start by putting yourself in the most triggering situation possible. You start with mild versions of your trigger and progressively increase intensity as your tolerance builds. If you're triggered by conflict, start by expressing small disagreements. Then work up to having difficult conversations. Then work up to addressing major issues. You build the muscle progressively. If you're triggered by rejection, start by putting yourself in low-stakes situations where rejection is possible. Ask for a small discount at a store. Pitch an idea that might get turned down. Share your creative work, even though most people will ignore it. Each small rejection builds a callus. Each time you survive it without collapsing, you prove to yourself that rejection is manageable. Your tolerance increases. If you're triggered by uncertainty, start by making small plans and letting them be flexible. Don't micromanage every detail. Let some things unfold without your control. Start with situations where the stakes are low. Then gradually expose yourself to bigger uncertainties. Each time you tolerate the discomfort without trying to control everything, You're building tolerance to the uncertainty that is inevitable in any ambitious life. The exposure must be deliberate and repeated. One time doesn't build tolerance. You need consistent practice over weeks and months. Just like one cold shower doesn't build cold tolerance, one uncomfortable conversation doesn't build conflict tolerance. You need to seek out these situations regularly enough that your nervous system gets the message. This is not an emergency. We can handle this. We don't need to panic. During the exposure, your job is to stay present with the discomfort without reacting to escape it. Feel the full intensity of the emotion. Notice where it lives in your body. Notice the thoughts that accompany it. But don't act on it. Don't lash out. Don't withdraw. Don't numb. Don't distract. Just be with it. This is the practice that builds tolerance. You'll notice that if you stay with an uncomfortable emotion without reacting, it peaks and then starts to subside. This is crucial information. Emotions are temporary waves that rise and fall. But when you react to escape the discomfort, you never learn this. You intervene right when the emotion is rising, and you never discover that it would have fallen on its own. You keep the pattern alive by constantly avoiding the full experience. When you stay through the peak and experience the natural decline, you learn that you can survive uncomfortable emotions, that they won't destroy you, that you don't need to react to make them go away, because they'll go away on their own if you just give them space. This learning is what gives you control over your reactions, because you're no longer reacting out of fear of the feeling. You know the feeling is temporary and manageable. Track your progress. Keep a log of exposures and how intense your reaction was. Over time, you'll see the pattern. Situations that used to rate a 9 out of 10 in intensity start to rate a 6, then a 4. You're building tolerance. The situation hasn't changed. Your capacity has changed. And that increased capacity is what gives you control. This practice is not about becoming numb or emotionless. It's about expanding your window of tolerance so that more situations fall within your ability to handle without reacting. You still feel everything. You just aren't overwhelmed and controlled by everything. You have room to feel and still choose your response. The discomfort of deliberate exposure is the price of freedom from reactive patterns. You can either pay that price now through deliberate practice, or you'll pay the much higher price later through relationships destroyed, opportunities lost, and a life controlled by triggers you never healed. Choose the deliberate discomfort. Build your tolerance. Gain control over your reactions by proving to yourself repeatedly that you can handle what triggers you. Chapter 7. Create response patterns that serve you. You have default reaction patterns that were formed years ago and are still running your behavior today. When X happens, you do Y. Every time. Automatically. Without thinking. These patterns were created through repetition and reinforcement, usually in childhood or during formative experiences. And they're keeping you stuck in cycles that don't serve the person you want to become. But here's what most people don't realize. If patterns can be formed through repetition, they can also be changed through repetition. You're not stuck with your default reactions. You can deliberately create new response patterns that align with who you want to be. This requires consistent practice, but it's absolutely possible. You can reprogram your automatic responses. First, you need to identify your current patterns. What are your automatic reactions to common triggers? When someone criticizes you, do you always get defensive? When plans change, do you always get upset? When you feel stressed, do you always reach for food or alcohol? When someone disappoints you, do you always withdraw? These are your patterns. They're predictable. And if they're predictable, they can be changed. For each pattern you want to change, you need to design an alternative response that serves you better. Not a perfect response. Not a response that requires you to be a different person. Just a response that's slightly better than your current default. If your default is to yell when angry, your alternative might be to take a walk. If your default is to withdraw when hurt, your alternative might be to express your feelings in words. Small upgrades to your patterns compound over time. Then you practice the new pattern deliberately. Every time the trigger happens, you consciously choose a new response instead of the old one. This is difficult at first. Your brain wants to run the old pattern because it's familiar and requires less energy. The new pattern feels awkward and forced. But if you persist, the new pattern becomes more automatic. Eventually, It becomes your new default. This is where the pause becomes critical. You need enough of a gap between trigger and response to consciously choose the new pattern instead of automatically running the old one. Trigger, pause, remember new pattern, choose new response. This sequence needs to be repeated dozens or hundreds of times before the new pattern becomes automatic. But it will become automatic if you stay consistent. Use implementation intentions to strengthen the new pattern. When I feel criticized, I will take 3 breaths and ask a clarifying question instead of defending myself. When plans change, I will pause and remind myself that flexibility is a strength, then adjust without complaining. When I feel stressed, I will go for a 10-minute walk instead of reaching for comfort food. These specific, if-then plans bypass your need to make a decision in the moment. You've already decided. You're just executing the plan. You can also create physical anchors for your new patterns. When you successfully choose your new response, create a small physical gesture, a fist pump, touching your thumb to your finger, a deep breath. This physical anchor connects the new pattern to a sensory experience. Over time, you can use the physical anchor to trigger the new pattern. The gesture reminds your body of the new response you're building. Track your wins. Every time you successfully choose your new response instead of your old one, mark it down. You're building evidence that change is possible, that you're not stuck in your old patterns, that you have agency over your reactions. This evidence is motivating. It shows you that the practice is working even when it still feels difficult. You'll have setbacks. There will be times when you're tired or stressed or caught off guard, and you default to the old pattern. This is normal. Don't use it as evidence that you can't change. Use it as information about when you're most vulnerable to falling back into old patterns. Then design support for those situations. Maybe you need more sleep. Maybe you need to avoid certain situations when you're depleted. Maybe you need to remind yourself of your new pattern before entering high-risk situations. The goal is progress, not perfection. If you used to react poorly 100% of the time, and now you react poorly 70% of the time, that's significant progress. Keep practicing. Next month it might be 50%, then 30%, then 10%. You're changing neural pathways that have been reinforced for decades. It takes time, but it works if you stay consistent. You can also enlist support. Tell someone you trust about the pattern you're changing and the new response you're practicing. Ask them to point out when they see you successfully choose a new pattern, or even when they see you fall back into the old one. External accountability reinforces your internal commitment, and external recognition of your wins provides additional reinforcement. As your new patterns become more automatic, you'll notice a profound shift in your sense of control. You're no longer at the mercy of your triggers. You have patterns that serve you, responses that you're proud of, behaviors that align with your values. This alignment creates a sense of integrity and power that reactive patterns never provide. The patterns you have now were created through unconscious repetition. The patterns you create deliberately through conscious repetition will replace them. You have more control over your reactions than you think. You just need to exercise that control consistently enough to rewire the automatic pathways. Create better patterns. Practice them relentlessly. Become someone whose reactions serve their growth instead of someone whose reactions keep them stuck. Chapter 8. Accept what you can't control. Control what you can. You're wasting enormous amounts of energy trying to control things that are outside your control. Other people's behavior, the weather, traffic, the economy, what people think of you, whether opportunities come your way, whether other people follow through on their commitments. None of these are within your control. And every moment you spend trying to control them is a moment you're not controlling what you actually can control. Your reactions. This is a fundamental divide between people who have control over their lives and people who feel constantly out of control. The first group has learned to distinguish between what they can control and what they can't. They pour their energy into the controllable zone and accept the uncontrollable zone. The second group is constantly trying to control the uncontrollable, which generates frustration, anxiety, and helplessness. And then they neglect the controllable because they're too exhausted from fighting battles they can't win. Your sphere of control is smaller than you want it to be. You can control your actions, your responses, your effort, your attention, your interpretations, your values, and your choices. That's mostly it. You cannot control outcomes, other people, circumstances, timing, or how your actions will be received. You can influence these things through your controllable actions, but you cannot control them. And the distinction between influence and control is crucial. When you try to control the uncontrollable, you set yourself up for reactive patterns. Your coworker doesn't do their part of the project, and you react with frustration and anger, but you can't control whether they do their part. That's outside your sphere. What you can control is how you respond to their failure. You can control whether you have a direct conversation about it. You can control whether you adjust your own work accordingly. You can control whether you let their behavior affect your mood for the rest of the day. Traffic is slow and you react with rage, but you can't control traffic. That's outside your sphere. What you can control is how you use that time, whether you listen to something educational or enjoyable, whether you practice breathing exercises, whether you accept that you'll be late and communicate that to whoever is waiting. The traffic is the same. But your reaction can shift from rage to acceptance when you stop trying to control what you can't. Someone criticizes you and you react defensively, trying to change their mind about you. But you can't control what they think. That's outside your sphere. What you can control is whether you consider their feedback objectively, whether you let their opinion affect your self-worth, whether you respond with dignity, regardless of whether they change their mind. Their opinion is theirs to hold. Your reaction is yours to control. This acceptance of the uncontrollable is not resignation. It's not giving up. It's strategic focus. It's recognizing that you have limited energy and attention, and wasting it on things you can't control leaves you with nothing left for things you can control. It's choosing to be powerful in your sphere rather than helpless in everyone else's. The Stoic philosophers had a practice for this. Distinguish between what's up to you and what's not up to you. Then concern yourself only with what's up to you. This doesn't mean you don't care about the rest. It means you don't try to control the rest. You can prefer certain outcomes. You can work toward them, but you can't control them. And trying to control them makes you reactive and miserable. When you notice yourself having a strong reaction, ask, what am I trying to control here that's outside my control? Usually, you'll find you're reacting because reality is different from what you wanted it to be. Someone behaved differently than you wanted. An outcome turned out differently than you hoped. A circumstance is different than you preferred. You're trying to control reality through your reaction, but it doesn't work. Reality is what it is. Your reaction doesn't change it. Then ask, what can I actually control in this situation? Redirect your focus and energy to that. You can't control that your flight was canceled. You can control how you handle the rebooking. You can't control that you didn't get the promotion. You can control how you use this information to improve for next time. You can't control that your partner is in a bad mood. You can control whether you take it personally and whether you offer support. This shift from trying to control the uncontrollable to controlling the controllable is enormously liberating. You stop feeling like a victim of circumstances. You stop feeling helpless. Because even in situations where most variables are outside your control, you always have control over your reactions. That one area of control is enough. It's where all your power lies. Practice radical acceptance of what you can't control. This doesn't mean you like it. It means you stop fighting reality. This is the situation. I don't like it, but it is what it is. Given that this is reality, what's my best response? This question moves you from reactive resistance to intentional action. From this shouldn't be happening to this is happening, now what? The serenity prayer captures this perfectly. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That wisdom, knowing the difference, is what stops you from wasting energy on the uncontrollable and redirects it to controllable. It's what turns you from reactive to responsive, from helpless to powerful. Make a list of the things you regularly react to. Then sort them into 2 columns, controllable and uncontrollable. Be ruthlessly honest. Most things belong in the uncontrollable column. That's not depressing. That's clarifying, because now you know where to focus. The controllable column is where your energy belongs. That's where your reactions should be directed. Everything else? Accept it and move on. Stop trying to control other people's circumstances and outcomes. Start controlling your reactions to other people, circumstances, and outcomes. This shift is the difference between a life of frustration and a life of power, between being controlled by what happens and controlling how you respond to what happens. Accept the uncontrollable. Master the controllable. This is how you reclaim control over your life. Your reactions are your responsibility. You've just been given a complete framework for controlling your reactions instead of letting life control you. Everything I've shown you works. Recognizing that you react to interpretations, not reality. Understanding that your triggers reveal your wounds. Mastering the pause between stimulus and response. Choosing responses based on values instead of feelings. Reframing situations before you react. Building emotional tolerance through exposure. Creating new response patterns. Accepting what you can't control and controlling what you can. But here's the truth that makes all of this possible or impossible. Your reactions are your responsibility, not your circumstances' responsibility, not other people's responsibility. Yours. No one makes you angry. No situation makes you anxious. No event makes you react. External triggers activate internal patterns, but those patterns are yours, and that means you have the power to change them. This is simultaneously the hardest truth and the most liberating truth. It's hard because it means you can't blame anyone else for your reactions anymore. You can't say they made me do it or I had no choice. You always have a choice. There's always a gap between what happens and how you respond, even if that gap is currently microscopic. And in that gap lives your responsibility and your power. But it's liberating because it means you're not a victim. You're not at the mercy of circumstances or other people or your triggers. You have agency. You can change your patterns. You can widen that gap. You can choose your responses. Your life is not controlled by what happens to you. It's shaped by how you respond to what happens to you. And you control that response. Right now, most of your reactions are automatic. Unconscious patterns running on autopilot. The work ahead of you is making those reactions conscious. Bringing awareness to the gap between trigger and response. Deliberately choosing new patterns. This work is difficult. It requires consistent practice. It requires you to be uncomfortable as you build new neural pathways and new habits. Here's what I want you to do in the next 24 hours. Identify your most destructive reaction pattern, the one that damages your relationships most or holds back your progress most or causes you the most regret. Maybe it's defensiveness when criticized. Maybe it's withdrawal when hurt. Maybe it's rage when frustrated. Maybe it's anxiety spiraling when things feel uncertain. Pick the one pattern that, if you could change it, would improve your life significantly. Then design one alternative response. Not perfect, just better. If your default is to yell, your alternative might be to take a walk. If your default is to shut down, your alternative might be to say, I need time to process this. If your default is to spiral, your alternative might be to write down your thoughts. Make your alternative response specific and actionable. Write down this commitment. When trigger happens, instead of old pattern, I will new response. Put it somewhere you'll see it daily. Then, for the next 30 days, practice this one change. Every time the trigger happens, pause, remember your commitment, and choose a new response. Track your wins. Notice when you fall back into the old pattern and use it as information, not condemnation. After 30 days, you will have evidence that you can control your reactions, that you're not stuck in your patterns. That change is possible. Then you can move to the next pattern. Slowly but surely, you'll replace your reactive defaults with intentional responses. You'll widen that gap between stimulus and response. You'll become someone who is controlled by their values, not their triggers. Now, if this video has shown you something crucial about why you keep reacting the same ways to the same situations, if it's revealed the gap between trigger and response that you didn't know existed, it's given you hope that you can actually change patterns you thought were permanent, then I need you to take one important action right now. Subscribe to this channel. But understand what you're doing when you subscribe. You're not just clicking a button to see more videos. You're making a declaration. You're declaring that you're done being controlled by your reactions, that you're ready to take responsibility for your patterns and do the work to change them, that you understand your reactions are yours to control and you're committed to developing that control. This channel exists for people who are serious about self-mastery. People who understand that blaming circumstances and other people for their reactions is a form of giving away power. People who are ready to reclaim that power by taking full responsibility for how they show up in the world. Every video here is designed to challenge you, to show you where you're still being controlled, and to give you frameworks for taking back control. Most people won't subscribe. They'll watch this video, feel temporarily inspired, and then go right back to blaming their reactions on external circumstances. They'll keep saying, "He made me angry," or "She hurt my feelings," or "This situation is so frustrating." They'll stay victims of their own unconscious patterns. They'll keep wondering why they can't change while refusing to take responsibility for their reactions. Don't be like most people. You didn't watch this far because you want to stay a victim of your reactions. You watch this far because you're ready to become the master of them. You're ready to accept that your reactions are your responsibility. And that means they're also your opportunity. Your chance to become someone who isn't controlled by life, but who responds to life with intention, wisdom, and power. When you subscribe, turn on notifications, not so you can passively consume content, but so you get reminded of these principles when you need them most. When you're about to react poorly, when you're about to blame someone else for your emotional state, when you're about to give away your power by saying, "I had no choice." Let each video be a reminder that you always have a choice, that the gap exists, that your reactions are yours to control. The subscription button is right there. And right now, you might be hesitating. You might be thinking, "I'll do it later," or "Let me watch a few more videos first." Notice that hesitation. That's a micro-reaction, a small pattern of delay and avoidance. You can react to that pattern by listening to it, or you can respond to it by overriding it and subscribing now. Let this be your first practice in choosing response over reaction. I'll see you in the next video. And when I do, I want you to be able to tell yourself that you've been practicing, that you've been catching your triggers before they become reactions, that you've been widening the gap between stimulus and response, that you've been taking responsibility for your patterns instead of blaming them on circumstances, because that's what people who control their reactions do. They practice, daily, relentlessly, until conscious response becomes more natural than unconscious reaction. You are capable of this transformation. You are capable of controlling your reactions instead of being controlled by them. You are capable of responding to life instead of reacting to it. But capability without practice is just potential, and potential without responsibility is just an excuse. So take responsibility now. Subscribe as your declaration. Practice as your proof. Transform your reactions from automatic patterns that control you into conscious choices that serve you. The life you want is not waiting for circumstances to change. It's waiting for your reactions to change. The relationships you want are not waiting for other people to change. They're waiting for you to respond differently. The person you want to become is not waiting for triggers to stop. They're waiting for you to stop being controlled by triggers. That person is possible. That life is available. That transformation is within your reach. But it starts with taking responsibility. It starts with understanding that your reactions are yours. And it starts with the decision to do the work to change them. Make that decision now. Close this video. Subscribe if you haven't. Then go practice responding instead of reacting. Notice your triggers. Pause before you react. Choose your response. Take responsibility. This is how you stop being controlled by life and start controlling how you show up in it. Your reactions are yours. Own them. Master them. Choose them. This is your power. This is your path. This is how you take control.